Lee is a shunter. He works on Thomas's branch line at Elsbridge but lives at Farquhar. As such, he always travels to work on board Annie and Clarabelle on Thomas's first passenger train of the day, then travels home on either their evening service or Daisy's. Thomas is always happy to see him. Whenever Lee waves at him, he always whistles, "Beep beep, hello!" Lee is also the brother of one of the cleaners. When the engines have finished their work on the branch line, he sometimes comes to the sheds to help clean them at the end of the day. One Saturday morning, Thomas was surprised to find Lee waiting for him at Farquhar. "What are you doing here, Lee?" he asked. "Last I heard, you don't work on weekends." "Ah," said Lee. "I'm meeting someone very important to me at Tidmouth." "Who is it?" Thomas asked. "Well, telling you would ruin the surprise, wouldn't it?" Lee smiled, blushing a little. "I wonder who it could be," Thomas pondered. Then he stopped. He noticed 2 passengers on the platform. He thought nothing initially of it, but something inside him told him that they would be trouble. But just then, the guard blew his whistle and Thomas puffed away, his mind still wondering over who Lee was meeting. "I wonder who it is, I wonder who it is," Thomas murmured to himself. Annie and Clarabelle chuckled. "Wait and see, wait and see." He arrived at Tidmouth on time, but had to shunt his train out of the way for Henry's stopping service. So he shunted Annie and Clarabelle into the siding out of the way. As he did so, Thomas saw Lee walk up to a man with blonde hair and embrace him warmly. He wasn't sure what to make of it, but said nothing as he moved the coaches towards the buffers and got ready to take a short goods train to Farmer McColl's farm. That evening, Thomas was waiting to take the last passenger train home. As he did so, he saw Lee walk up to him, accompanied by the blonde man. "Thomas," Lee announced, "I would like you to meet Ray, my boyfriend." "Ray? I don't think I need tell you who this is." "Well, bust my buffers," Thomas exclaimed. "Do you mean to tell me that you two are in—" "Indeed we are, Thomas," Lee replied. But I thought only—" Thomas stuttered. "Love can come in any form," Ray interrupted. "By the way, I've heard a lot about you from Lee, and from the Finn clergyman's books. Gotta say, it's amazing to finally see you. Nice going with Bertie the bus on that race as well." Thomas forgot he was surprised, and instead felt smug as he listened to Ray's accolades. Just then, Bertie arrived to take some of the passengers home, and Thomas realised it was time to leave. Passengers took their seats aboard bus and train, and Thomas puffed away, deep in thought. "Well, cut me down and call me Scrap," he said to himself. "Men falling in love with men. I didn't know that was possible."
"Well, you know what they say,"
replied Annie. "Nothing's impossible," finished Clarabelle. Thomas looked at them peculiarly. "That reminds me," he said slowly. "How come you two knew about this, but I didn't?"
"Well, let's put it this way," the coaches said.
"Not everyone likes the thought of relationships like theirs." "What do you mean?" asked Thomas.
"You'll see," said the coaches mysteriously. Thomas, still confused, decided it was best to do so.
The next day, Toby arrived at Elsbridge with his vintage train. He had heard about Lee and his boyfriend, and smiled approvingly. Lee seemed so happy around Ray, he thought to himself. Just then, Gordon puffed in. He looked forlorn. Toby was surprised by this. Gordon usually sniffed pompously when he saw him pulling the vintage. "Bad run, Gordon?" he asked kindly.
"The worst," the big engine moaned. "I was making good time as I passed through Kelsford. Then some passengers start complaining about something. I can't think what it was, but I'm worried I might have been running late or giving them a rough ride."
"It's nothing to do with you, Gordon," came a voice. "It's about us." Both engines looked around. There, on the platform, stood 3 women. One was tall with brown hair, the other was about the same height with blonde hair, while the third was slightly shorter with ginger hair. "Excuse me, miss," asked Toby. "Would 2 of you be Kathy and Lizzie? I heard about you from Peter Sam." Kathy and Lizzie smiled. "That's us," they agreed. "And this is my partner, Karen," Kathy introduced. Karen gave a little wave.
Kathy and Lizzie used to come here on their holidays,
Gordon explained.
They volunteered on the Scarlowy Railway from time to time.
"But I decided to move here after I met Karen," Kathy announced. "We both studied at university together," Karen added. "I'm afraid we encountered a couple of homophobes on the express." "I see," said Toby, a look of worry on his face. "I hope they didn't hurt you." "No, don't worry," laughed Kathy. "It was just a few bad words. We got our own back by showing them up," finished Karen. Both engines laughed. Soon after Gordon left, the signal moved to show line clear and Toby puffed away. But no one had noticed the 2 suspicious-looking passengers Thomas had spotted yesterday as they climbed aboard Victoria. Toby pulled into Tory Wreck, where he found Lee and Ray waiting on the platform. "Ding ding! Hello, you 2. Heading up to Farquhar, are you?" Toby greeted, ringing his bell. "Indeed we are, Toby," Ray greeted. "We're meeting up with my cousins for dinner," explained Lee. "Well, mind how you go," replied Toby. "I've been told there were some homophobics on Gordon's Express when I collected his passengers." "Oh, we will," they replied as they boarded Victoria. Toby smiled and pulled out of the station. He had just passed Mrs. Kindley's cottage when it happened. One minute, they were pulling into the platform at Farquhar. The next, Toby felt his brakes come on sharply. "Whatever's the matter?" he asked, shocked. The driver said nothing. He and the fireman just climbed out of his cab and walked towards Victoria, with grim looks on their faces. Poor Victoria was in a terrible state. "There's a fight inside me," she panicked. "Someone stop it, quickly! There's already been 1 person knocked out." As she spoke, sirens could be heard in the distance. As the guard climbed out of Elsie, the passengers swarmed out of Victoria. They crowded around the crew, telling them what had happened, whilst 2 figures quietly slipped away, just as the police cars and an ambulance arrived. Toby was horrified to see Lee and Ray, covered in cuts and bruises, emerge from Victoria. Ray was being led out by medics who were treating his wounds, while Lee was lying unconscious on a stretcher. "Some stupid idiots ganged up on those 2 and beat the living daylights out of them," explained his driver. Toby gasped. "Will they be all right?" he asked nervously. "Ray will be fine," answered his driver solemnly, "but I'm not sure about Lee. Best wait and see what the doctors say. Come on, boy, we'd best get some water." Mavis is due to bring down some trucks later for us to take to the harbour. That night, Toby told Thomas and Percy what had happened in the shed. The 2 engines were speechless. "How awful!" cried Thomas. "Fancy!" cried Percy. 2 people ganging up on others just because of some silly thing called hippopotama? "Homophobia," explained Toby. "It's when people don't like other people who prefer to love those who are the same gender as them." "Ridiculous, we say," came a voice. The engines looked around and saw Kathy, Karen and Lizzie standing in the shed doorway. Toby introduced them to Thomas and Percy. "What are you doing here?" asked Percy. "Our uncle, Lee's father, is a cleaner at this shed," Kathy explained. "We asked if we could come with him to tell you about Lee," Lizzie added. "We want you to know that he's unconscious, but the doctors say there's a strong chance he could make a full recovery," Karen finished. Then, with a grimace, she added, "But I wish I could get my own back on those miserable little idiots." When do you think he will get better? Asked Percy. The doctors say once he comes round, he'll take about a week to recover, Kathy explained. Shame I won't be able to see him, sighed Thomas. I'm due to go to the works for some repairs to my... He broke off as an idea flew into his funnel. Listen, he said. Those two have to be stopped. I know what to do. And he told them his plan. The next day, Thomas pulled Annie and Clarabelle into Farquhar on their first passenger run of the day after explaining to them his plan. As agreed, Kathy, Karen and Lizzie were standing on the platform. Out of the corner of her eyes, Kathy saw the two suspicious-looking passengers watching them on the platform. They were the two who had insulted her on Gordon's Express. It looks like a beautiful day on Sodor, Thomas, she said, nodding in his direction. Yes, indeed, he replied, an acknowledging gleam in his eyes. Then, Kathy and Karen boarded Clarabelle, and Thomas watched as the two passengers climbed aboard the same compartment, while Lizzie climbed aboard Bertie. He had been told about the plan too. Race you to the next station, Thomas, he called, a determined look in his eyes. Only so long as the fat controller doesn't find out, Thomas replied, giving Bertie a knowing grin. As Thomas made his way towards Hackenbeck, he, Annie and Clarabelle kept an ear out for any trouble. Then it happened. All at once, 4 voices could be heard coming from Clarabelle. Leave us alone, why can't you? Came Karen's voice. Why can't you shut up? Replied another. You leave my girlfriend out of this, Kathy's voice called out. Girlfriend, eh? You a lesbian? Asked a 4th voice. Yeah, what's it to you? Kathy asked. A loud scream could be heard from Clarabelle. We beat up another little jerk for being gay, so you better apologize for being a lesbian. Let me go, yelled Kathy, and say sorry, you worthless little... It's them, yelled Clarabelle. No, Thomas, no! Shrieked Annie. One of Thomas's valves had not been lubricated properly. Subsequently, it was now slowly moving out of place. His crew had noticed this yesterday and had informed the works foreman, who had arranged to send Thomas to the works that evening. Mistakenly, neither driver nor fireman had thought this repair essential, and so had not arranged for his repairs sooner. This was something Thomas had decided to use to his advantage. If he could force it hard enough... Driver, stop! Quickly! There's a fight aboard the train, he called. Steam engines have special parts called valves. They are used to control the steam that sets the wheels in motion. The more steam that the valves allow into the engine's cylinders, the faster the engine goes in the direction the driver sets the reverser to. If the valves are damaged, the engine is stranded. Thomas knew this well. He stopped the train so hard that Annie and Clarabelle bumped into him. There was a loud clang, and Thomas disappeared in a cloud of steam. Immediately, the fireman damped down his fire, and the driver jumped down to inspect the damage. Never mind me, cried Thomas. There's a fight on the train. By this point, all the passengers had climbed out of Annie and Clarabelle and were now walking up to Thomas, complaining at the delay. What's the meaning of this? They said. We can't be kept waiting. Well, I'm not moving for you. One of you has picked a fight with my friend, Thomas replied crossly. Why do you care? It's just some lesbos we saw the other day, a voice called out. Thomas looked to where the voice had come from. He saw the same 2 suspicious-looking passengers he and Toby had seen every time something had happened. Why? Just because they love people the same gender, it doesn't mean you can say who people should spend their lives with. And what would you know? The 2 passengers argued. You're only a steam engine. You don't even have love lives. As far as we're concerned, the only reason we bother with you lot is when we need to go somewhere. You should be grateful to us that you get more respect from us than those deserve. So you beat up Lee, Thomas yelled. What's it to you? One of the 2 asked. He's just a shunter. He's not one of your crew. He is my friend, raged Thomas. And that's more than enough for me to stand by him. As he said this, the driver, fireman and guard ran towards the passengers accompanied by Karen and Lizzie, but the two passengers were much too fast for them and ran up the hill towards the road, where Lizzie and Bertie were waiting, along with two police cars and 4 officers who had heard everything.
Both of you, on the
They
fucking
tackled
ground, you're
the
under
two
arrest!
passengers to the ground, placed handcuffs on them, and carted them away in the cars. Bertie wasn't very full, so he was able to take Thomas's passengers to Elsbridge, where James was waiting to take them elsewhere. Soon, Daisy arrived to shunt Thomas back to Farquhar. She had been rescheduled to take Thomas's return trip in his place before her own schedule began, and so had been asked by the station master to rescue him. She left him in the engine shed, and Mavis, since the quarry was closed for rock blasting that day, took over his work. Meanwhile, Karen, Kathy and Lizzie told the station master at Elsbridge, who told the Fat Controller everything over the telephone. That evening, he arranged for Thomas to be shunted into Tidmouth Station, where a great crowd of people were waiting.
I don't approve of my engine stopping during passenger services, Thomas,
He scolded.
You're not Duncan, so I don't expect this sort of behaviour from you.
He stopped when he saw Thomas's crestfallen face and smiled.
What is more,
He said,
you broke yourself just to catch 2 passengers who committed a very serious crime, and I'm very,
"Yes, sir," Thomas gulped nervously.
very proud of you.
Finished the Fat Controller, smiling.
Thanks to you and these fine ladies,
He said, gesturing to Karen, Kathy and Lizzie.
the criminals who hurt one of my staff and his boyfriend have been taken into custody and will now face justice for their crimes. What is more, I am very glad to say that Lee is making a successful recovery.
He said, nodding towards Lee, who was now standing at the front of the crowd next to Ray, on crutches, but nonetheless happy for his friend. "Thank you, Thomas," Lee smiled. Thomas grinned, and was about to reply when the Fat Controller spoke up.
But this whole sorry business serves as an example of the poor attitudes some people have towards others.
He carried on.
My railway is a place where everyone is welcome, regardless of age, culture, skin color, or sexual preference. We refuse to tolerate anyone who is quick to insult others deliberately, just because they dislike anything about them. Such mistreatment is immature and wrong. Had it not been for all those involved with the capture of those 2 criminals, others may well have fallen victim to their prejudice.
A loud murmur of agreement, accompanied by a round of applause, greeted this.
I am very pleased to see,
The Fat Controller went on,
that what I have said is reflected in my engines, rolling stock, and those who assist or travel on my railway. Only those with cruel intentions in their hearts towards innocents are forbidden to use it. I can only hope that those who hear of these events will understand how wrong it is to abuse others over differences.
Thomas the Tank Engine was quick to agree.